are now listening to an inspirational message from the Greater Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, where Dr. Michael Wesley Sr. is pastor. Please join the service in progress.
We're going to come just twice more in this series on Moses. We're going to speak today, and then we're going to come back next week. Is one more that I want to talk about. Then we'll take a break from the series on the life of Moses, I think. God still has the word. The morning, Exodus 20, you read it in responsive reading. The 17 verses there of Exodus 20, I want to focus on, but I want to look at, I'll just read the first three in your hearing and we'll explain it. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. This is the word of God for the people of God. I want to simply talk about the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments. Why do we need them? What is it about? You know, it's a top 10 list. And people everywhere are concerned about the top 10. They do surveys all the time, and people want to know the top 10 reasons for this, or the top 10 fashionable things, or the top 10 things. But suppose you were God, and I know you're not, and I know you can't get there, and you wanted to write down what was really critical to you for someone to know about how they should live. What would you include and what would you leave out? So it's difficult to break down all of humanity and all of law and all of life and to put it in summary form to the point that people can have some guidelines for living. And even though people can't live up to these commandments, God still wanted people to have some boundaries. And God still wanted people to have a built-in teacher that would lead us to a place of recognizing that we are not where we think we are. See, church has done, in a sense, over the recent years, a disservice to people. In the sense that people become, I don't want to say it like this, but people become liars. They become pretenders. People pretend that they are really better than they are. And fool themselves. Well, that's who they fool themselves. Because other people already see through you. And certainly God already knows that we're not there. And so God, we have to be reminded every now and then of the realities that even though we can dress up and we can look good and we can sit prim and proper and we can nod, we are not there. And life, spiritual life is not a destination where you ultimately arrive. It's always a journey that we're on our way. And until and unless we put it in that kind of perspective and context, we will continue to fool ourselves into thinking that we will one day arrive at a moral perfection that's just not within the human to live, to get to. And see, the understanding behind all of this will eliminate a need then to front and perpetrate and pretend. When you know, the law is a mirror that is held up in our face. And when we look into it, we don't always like what we see. And so consequently, there have been a lot of people that just don't look no more. And consequently, the morality of the nation is falling apart. The fabrics of families are unraveling because we don't like to hold this mirror up. We don't like to see it. We don't like what it says. And many people really and truly don't like church when real biblical preaching takes place. People like church when it's an entertaining circumstance, or when it's always talking about others, but we don't like to have to slide down in our seats. And we don't like to be good Baptists where we put our finger up and have to tiptoe out because it gets a little tough. We want to say amen. We don't like to say ouch. But I said earlier that sometimes church is not today as dangerous as it needs to be. And by dangerous, I mean convicting. To the point that it eliminates, it eradicates from us, it roots out of us the need to think that somehow we can sit on holy thrones and look sideways at other people and act as if we're better. This word this morning is again in a strategic place in this book of Exodus. And we have walked through much of the first part of the book of Exodus. The first 18 chapters of the book of Exodus concern itself with the Exodus, with the going out of the people of Israel out of Egypt. That's what Exodus means, and that's where the book gets its name from, the going out of people. But when we come to the second part of the book, beginning at chapter 19 and going through chapter 40, it concerns itself now with the giving of the law. Now, the giving of the law is in three parts because there are three kinds of law that God gave to the people of Israel. The first part, or the first kind of law, is called the moral law, M-O-R-A-L, moral, which means it helps shape and guide living. It becomes framework, it becomes boundaries for helping people understand what is expected. The second kind of law that God gave was called the civil law. And the civil law had to do with regulating how the government of the nation would function, how the people should treat and respond to higher authority. And then the third kind of law that is given is called the ceremonial law, or the Levitical law. It is explained in greater detail in the book of Leviticus because it deals with the function of the priest in the tabernacle, and as a result is called the ceremonial law because it deals with the ordinances, with the way the people were to approach God in worship. So today I want to talk a little bit about this moral law because this is what I think is so needful again, not just to hang in the courtrooms, not just to have as decoration to appear, but to be true guidelines to help us to know where we need to be trying to go, and at the same time to put a dose of reality inside of us to understand that although that's where we're trying to go, that's not where we are. And so this was spoken by God to Moses and to the children of Israel. The circumstance in the 19th chapter, before I get there, let me help you understand how this was set up. In the ancient world, recent scholars have uncovered and discovered that most nations were put together in treaties or covenants. And they had two different types of treaties or covenants that the nations were formed around. One was called a parity treatise. A parity treatise, a covenant agreement, was an agreement where two equal parties kind of agreed to respect each other. And that's why it's called a parity pairs. Two different kings would agree mutually. Neither one was trying to be superior to the other. And so one king would say, okay, I'll respect your property and I'll respect your country. I won't intrude upon you. You respect mine and you won't intrude upon me and ours. And that was called a parity. That's similar to what today we deal with as it relates to contracts. In our modern society, contracts are parity codes. Usually in a contract, one person is a buyer and one person is a seller, but they both are equal in the sight of the law. And so they are equal. One is not superior to another. So the second type of development, should I say arrangement, was called a suzerainty treaties. It was based upon the old Hittite law code. And what that type of law code did, it was where a superior king or one who had conquered another nation would lay out to his subjects what the arrangements would be if you are now under my authority. And so these commandments here, this decalogue of the law is of that type. In that type of arrangement, it usually fell into 6 parts. The first part was a preface or an introduction. The second step was where the king, it was a statement where the ruler introduces himself. The third would be a historic statement where the ruler would describe, this is what I have done for you, and therefore you should serve me. And so the fourth statement would be the obligations that were laid upon people who were under the ruler. And the fifth statement would be the blessings that people could expect if they obeyed. And the last section would be the judgments or the curses that will come upon people if they disobey. So very easily we can see that the 10 commandments are of that type. It began with God introducing himself to the people and explaining to them what he has done for them and why they should serve him. Now, you gotta understand that preparation for this was made because God knew that people just should not enter into agreements with him without some type of preparation. So we have the 19th chapter. Can I teach? In the 19th chapter, the first 8 verses, there was a dialogue, conversation. Moses was the man who was speaking on God's behalf. And he went to the people of Israel and said to them, God wants to enter into a covenant agreement, into a treaties agreement with you. Do you want to be in such a relationship with God? And the people said, yes, all that the Lord said, we would do. Now, you know they were lying. You know they didn't do it. But they agreed. And the second part of the preparation was kind of a ceremonial cleansing. Verses 9 through 14, we would find there the people were expected to sanctify themselves. The men were to refrain from being with their wives. And that was to be a period of cleansing so that they could get their hearts and minds right to meet God. And the third section was a separation where they built a fence off the mountain. They now had come out of the wilderness of Rephidim and they are encamped at Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And God has said, I'm going to come down on the mountain. And the mountain would be on fire. It would look like a volcano. It would reel and rock and smoke would go up and the top of the mountain would be on fire. It would be a terrible sight. And so God wanted the people to understand, don't come but just so close, because anyone who touches the mountain when I am on the mountain is going to die. Now I think what God was doing was 2 things. I think God was teaching, number 1, that he's holy. And it's the same kind of experience that God had to teach Moses when Moses first met God. That you just can't come up in God's face. God told Moses, take your shoes off. The ground you're standing on is holy ground. And so he's putting a fence around and letting the people know, don't just come here. Sanctify yourself. Cleanse yourself 3 days. Prepare to meet me. Man, I think, can I digress a moment before I get into this? And say that that's one of the reasons we can't get as much out of worship as we should. It's because we don't do any advanced preparing to come here. Some folk just show up. I mean, they show. I mean, I know it's a hospital, and I know you can come to the hospital any kind of way. But folk come here, sure enough, any kind of way. They golly. And as a result, because we have not prepared ourselves in advance, we don't sense the awe, the reverential awe of being in the presence of God. I mean, folk get up, man. Some folk don't even comb their hair; they just come on. I mean, don't rinse their mouth out. And as a result, I mean, then you expect, when you get here, you expect this to be some kind of clown show. You expect the entertainment to take place and to woo you and to move you and make you want to do. No, if you prepare yourself, if you pray, if you prepare your mind spiritually for a personal encounter with God, you won't need, listen, you don't be waiting on them to sing. You join them in singing. You don't wait on somebody to lead you in prayer. You're praying when they're praying. You don't wait on somebody to read the scripture for you. You're reading along with it because you're already in tune. And when it's like that, you get more out of this. And so God was teaching. And so because he wanted them to prepare, then the day that they would have prepared to meet God. See, they needed this. These were people, they were just 3 months. This is the 3rd month out of slavery. They had been down in Egypt for 430 years. They did not have any idea of what respectable, worshipful guidelines were. They had been in a country that was polytheistic. They had seen all of the other kinds of gods running around there. And now this was the day God was going to introduce himself to them. And they would be formed into a nation. And so that day God set the mountain on fire. I mean, the mountain reeled and rocked like a drunken man. See, the mountain couldn't contain God. You can't contain God. The world can't contain God. God is greater than any of those things. But he can manifest himself wherever he chooses to. So that day he showed up on the mountain. And he audibly let them hear his speech. And the Bible said it was like the voice of many trumpets, and it was growing louder and louder. It was a frightening sight. But God spoke out of that mountain. So I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And then he began to give the commandments. And the first one he said, I'm a jealous God, and thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, my brothers, I got to tell you today that I know that I won't have time to explain each one of these, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview because we can take each one and preach for a whole month on each one. But today, I don't have no other God like me. He said, listen, he said, this is where you ought to start. You ought to start with understanding who I am. I mean, if you're going to love me, you're going to love other folk, you got to start at the right place. The Lord, your God. God is demanding. He's exclusive. He said, I'm not like any other God you've ever met. I've already done for you what you couldn't do for yourself. When you was on the backside of another nation, lost in your own self, could not find your own way, did not have any kind of hope or possibilities for another day, I reached down and I brought you out. Listen, so therefore I'm jealous. If you're going to belong to me, it's going to be an exclusive relationship. Jealous God. Don't have no other God before me. Now, as he goes through these commandments, you got to remember that he speaks most of them in the negative. Thou shalt not. And the word not is a negative. But the meaning is to do the complete opposite. If he said, don't do this, he really means this is what I want you to do. So he said, thou shalt not have no other gods before me, which means, what? I'm going to be the only one in your life. And then he gives the second command, and he said, and you shall not make for you any form of an idol. In other words, don't make me look like nothing that you see flying around. Don't make me look like nothing you see crawling. Don't make me look like nothing you see creeping and nothing you see swimming. See, they had come out of a culture like that. Down in Egypt, they had gods that had human bodies. They had heads of frogs. They had faces like spiders. They had the heads of bulls and cows. And when God whipped on Egypt, he proved that they were nothing. So he said, don't make me look like anything that you see. Otherwise, I don't need a brand. I don't need you to be trying to create an image for who I am. Because who I am, you can't even imagine. So don't try and to make this thing like it ought to be. This is exactly what Jesus did. Jesus had to help us. He showed up one day in a village called Samaria. And there was a woman now who had been a street woman. And they was having a conversation at the well. And as the conversation got a little deep, the girl got a little smart with Jesus said, you Jews say that it's Jerusalem that you ought to worship, but we Samaritans say that on Mount Gerizim is where we worship. Jesus said, hush. Said, listen, you don't even know what you're talking about. God is a spirit. And he said, and they who worship him must worship him how? In spirit and in truth. Therefore, don't make me look like nothing, because I don't look like nothing. Listen, if you're going to worship me, you're going to have to worship me inside, because I live in the mind. Listen, if you don't believe what I'm talking about, he showed up to Nicodemus, a Pharisee, and he said, listen, son, let me tell you about the Spirit. The Spirit is like the wind. It blows where it will. You can't see it. You can only feel it. You can't even tell where it came from or where it's going. You just know when it passed by you. Oh God, I wish somebody would hear me this morning. Because when the God Spirit moves on the heart of the human, you can't see where it come from, but you know it when it show up, because it moves on you and it shakes you and it upsets you and disturbs you. God said, oh, so don't be trying to make me look like nothing. But it's a human thing to want to have a God that we can see. It's a human thing to want to have a God that we can control. See, we want something that we can move when we say move. We want something that would do what we tell it to do. But my God, did you hear that girl say, my God reigns? And when he reigns, you can't control what he does. So he said, don't make me look like nothing. Then he gave a third commandment, and he said, listen, don't misuse the name of your God. Hello. If you're a young person, I want you to hear this especially, because too many of our today's youth and young adults misuse the name of God. I mean, you know, yeah, we learned about it in profanity. I know y'all know. But too many young people play this game, man, on everything, on God. Man, don't misuse God's name. God's name is too precious. It's too holy. Listen, let me tell you why. Because he's listening. He's waiting on you. If you are his child and you called on his name, he's coming. You know, you will get arrested today in today's society if you misuse using 911. If you call the police or call for an emergency and they show up and there's no emergency and you're there laughing, they're going to take you away because you have misused an emergency network. They got everything. They got fire trucks. They got police cars. They got helicopters. They got everything ready to come to the rescue of someone in trouble, and they don't want to be played with. And if the human comes with all of that, God got all of heaven waiting when one of his children is in trouble and they call out unto him. God is ready to move heaven and earth. So don't play with him. Don't use his name in vain. You got to understand, Jesus teaches this thing in what we call the model prayer. We call it the Lord's Prayer. But he said, our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed, holy is your name. Thy will be done, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So God is waiting on you to call him, but don't do it wrongly. Don't swear on everything. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Shared the story of Aesop's fable this morning about a little boy who used to call Wolf. Every day in the sheep herding village where all of the men were farming and herding sheep, the little boy would call, "It's a wolf, it's a wolf." And all of the men would get their guns and their axes and they'd come looking for the wolf. And the little boy would just laugh, "Oh, it ain't no wolf. I fooled y'all, I fooled y'all." And one day there really was a wolf. And he was crying, "Oh, it is a wolf, it is a wolf." And no one moved. You don't want to be like that. You don't want to be one day when you need the Lord and need him right away. But
Hope you enjoyed the broadcast. You have been listening to a message from the Greater Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, where we are reaching the world for Christ, located at 2135 Jefferson Avenue Southwest, Birmingham, Alabama 35211. For a copy of a CD or DVD, you can reach us at 205-925-5972 or visit us on the web at www.greatershallow.org for an uplifting message. Please join us for the next broadcast.